Allegedly, there is a video of Patrick Scruggs committing a very, very violent act, and I don't understand where the hangup is here. This man allegedly threw a steak knife at his wife, and he was treated completely different than Patrick Scruggs was. But again, if you're in the system, working with the system, I think there's just this natural tendency of relatedness where you get handled with kids' gloves. He broke the window with the back handle of his knife, tried to open the door from the inside. Blake tried to shove his arms out of his car, out of his vehicle, and then Patrick Scruggs began to stab him.
We're talking about Patrick Scruggs. Can you bring everybody up to speed on what you've been doing or what your involvement has been?
Well, I've been accused of being petty before. This man told me that I was a threat to my community, gave me an ankle monitor, told me I had a curfew, a nightly curfew, couldn't leave the house during certain hours. And a year later, in 2023, I believe it was, he was filmed allegedly stabbing a man on the interstate or the highway. And the story has had lots of twists and turns since then. The person that he stabbed we can get right into it. He's had a history of drug and alcohol abuse. He's been arrested a handful of times. During this time, there's actually warrants out for his arrest. His name is Blake Sharp. So he's had his run-ins with the police before.
This is the person who got stabbed, just so everybody knows, or allegedly got stabbed. He was in the vehicle.
Yes. Now, does it mean that he deserves to be stabbed? I don't think so. I think everyone deserves to not be stabbed.
Yeah, good general rule.
So during this incident, he was having a medical issue. The defense for Mr. Scruggs is arguing that he was under the influence during the time. Now, they did not test him for drugs or alcohol when he was in the hospital because he had just gotten done being stabbed. And they're arguing because he has a history that he was obviously under influence during this event. So they're going with a self-defense, Daniel Penny type of story, type of narrative. We've had local newspapers already put out articles saying that, there's more to the story that meets the eye. What I saw was a man allegedly, again, innocent until proven guilty, leave his vehicle, break a car window with his knife, and then stab a man over and over again. That's what I saw. That's what the world saw. So if you're telling me self-defense is exiting your vehicle and entering someone else's vehicle, we are a stand your ground state. This was a leave your ground, enter someone else's ground altercation.
Yeah, and so we saw the video. We saw some footage of that, right? People were there taking it, posting it on Facebook, and even in our thumbnail, we have the one image, right? There's a guy in the car who's got his hands out the window with, I think, blood on him. I mean, he looked bloody to me. And this other, I think at the time he was a prosecutor, right? A U.S. prosecutor?
Yes. So he worked for the federal government as a prosecutor. He was my prosecutor. And then he went with a private firm, I think, shortly afterwards. They have since cut ties with him.
Yeah, okay. And he's still being prosecuted. And so when did this happen originally, the alleged attack?
I believe it was September of 2023 was when this happened. So it's been a very long time that this case has been ongoing. And there have been delays with this. There have been, look, you hire a good defense, you're going to want these things, you're going to want continuances, you're going to, come with the best defense possible. I'm not mad at the defense for bringing this argument, but this argument on its face is I don't know who would believe this. And what concerns me is I think I know the tactic they're going for. Blake Sharp has been in jail almost immediately since this event occurred. They've held him because he violated probation. He had a dirty urine test, so he is now in jail. On top of this, he is also a CI for the local sheriff's office. So he called Carlos, the guy who's in charge of his, confidential informant status, and he said, I'm going to turn myself in. I know there are warrants. So he's been held here. What concerns me is that I believe that they are leveraging his current conditions of being in jail as a way to get him to rectify his testimony to say, I was under the influence during the time, so he might be passed off on these other charges that he's currently being held for. In the courtroom today, that was very much the vibe that was happening. The defense was asking to meet with him in jail. They had been in contact with his father. The defense typically doesn't meet with these people. The prosecutors do. They get testimony, they swear it in, this is the person.
That's exactly right. He's the victim of a crime, allegedly, right? He just got shanked multiple times by a prosecutor. So the defense, many states, and I'm not licensed in Florida, I don't practice there, but many states have victims' bill of rights, and victims are protected against that because they don't want defense attorneys going in there and getting them to change their story, obviously.
Exactly. I think one of the biggest injustices we've seen here is this case never should have been tried in his backyard, in the place where he has worked with these people for years. These are his friends, his neighbors. They all hang out at the same bar at 5 o'clock when it's time to check out. This was something that never should have happened in the same district that he worked in.
Yeah, and that is a really pernicious thing that people, I think, have a hard time comprehending. But when I was practicing more, I was regularly watching, right, basically judges and prosecutors go into the same building. They park in the same parking lots. They walk into the same buildings. They go to the same lunch shops. Okay, they're all like in the same little arena with each other. And from my perspective as a defense attorney, we're on the outs of that. We don't get that same camaraderie. And so you start to see some funny business happening between everybody.
This is what it feels like. And it's been this since day one. The defense, the prosecution, everyone's very pally-pally with this guy because they've known him for a long time. And I understand it's federal and state are different, but there is communication open between those two departments because a lot of times things get kicked from one side to the other. So when I'm watching these proceedings go under, I'm mostly mostly concerned because the state and the defense seem to be on the same page. And while, that's a good thing because, trials do cost the taxpayers money. And if you can come to an agreement that a crime was committed and this is a reasonable sentence without having to burden the taxpayers and the judge and the whole system, that's fine. I'm fine with that. They're not even concerned about the jury trial that is scheduled for February 10th. It seems like they have no intention of ever showing up to this. It's never going to happen. That they understand that there is a play to be made and they are making this play behind closed doors.
Interesting. And yeah, I want to ask you about, you were there today, right?
I was.
And you've been following this case for a while, but I just wanted to comment on what you said because there is a code of conduct that exists and you hear about it a lot with police, like this blue code of silence or this blue shield that cops have amongst themselves. And I've seen it happen. I've watched it, multiple times, but it also exists amongst prosecutors. And this happens regularly too. We had that one case in Arizona where it was the Philip Brailsford case where you may have seen the video. It went, mega viral at the time, but it was a young man who was begging for his life on his knees in a hotel room and a cop just executed that dude.
I saw.
And yep, it was a horrific case. The guy had all sorts, like you're effed on his gun and all sorts of stuff. It was
on his dust plate. Yep, I remember this.
Yeah, and it looked like a murder to everybody who saw it. And so they prosecuted the guy, but he actually got acquitted because the Arizona prosecutors just kind of laid down. It's just kind of like they play like D level and they just don't do their job. And then you see their friends get off, and it's one of the most corrupt things you've ever seen.
Well, I mean, there is a video, and again, I'll keep saying alleged because I don't like how I was talked about in the middle of all this. Allegedly, there is a video of Patrick Scruggs committing a very, very violent act, and I don't understand where the hangup is here. There is a video of it. This should be cut and clear. And the way they're spinning this is because this man is, has had run-ins with the police, because that he, has had these prior arrests, that his life is less valuable. I think that is such a disservice to the justice system because even if I get on board with that concept, that there are some people who maybe deserve, they have things coming to them, fine. We have a justice system to ensure that that happens in a natural order, in a natural sense. And every time that we see these events occur where it's pally-pally and people just, I have maybe unspoken immunity from this because we're all friends. Every time we see that happen, it degrades our justice system a little bit more. And I am nervous that we will never recover what I think a lot of us believe to be true, that the justice system is free and fair and there is balance and impartiality.
We hope for that. And unfortunately, we see less of that than we should. What happens oftentimes in these types of cases is that sometimes this happens naturally, where a defense attorney will get two co-defendants, kind of two people did something wrong. And those can actually be strong cases because then you tell everybody, both defendants, like shut your mouth and you'll be okay. Like don't testify against each other and you can have strength and, unity. But that usually doesn't happen when you have one person knifing the other person, right? So the fact that this Blake Sharp person is now almost being coerced, kind of like, we'll give you a better plea deal if you agree unspoken, right, not to testify in these other case or not to be a victim because you made a wrong. Like two rights don't make a wrong. You did something bad in these other cases. He did something bad here. And so just let's make it all a wash. But the problem with that is the things that he did aren't codified under criminal law such that the sentence is you get stabbed multiple times in your car, right? There are other penalties for this. And so we can't have like a trade-off type of criminal justice system, which is what you're seeing there.
We do have an Eighth Amendment. That's pretty clear, like cruel and unusual. No, you shouldn't be stabbed in your car. And again, I don't think that we're going to see a natural resolution that we would see. There was actually someone there today, another defendant, because, courtrooms, they go through a whole docket. This man allegedly threw a steak knife at his wife, and he was treated completely different than Patrick Scruggs was. But again, if you're in the system, working with the system, I think there's just this natural tendency of relatedness where you get handled with kids' gloves.
Yeah, and that is a real shame. And you might think he's being prosecuted by state prosecutors at the moment, right? He worked for the federal government. And so some people might think, as you mentioned earlier, that there's a delineation between the two of those. But it's this code, right? Prosecutors like other prosecutors. I think that even if he went to another location, let alone his backyard, he'd still get a benefit of a doubt from other prosecutors. But the fact that he's right there in Florida and worked in that jurisdiction, worked in that district, he knows the judges, he knows the other prosecutors, and it's showing.
I agree. There's this biblical concept where people who are put in positions of leadership, right, that if they don't adhere to the policies and the lessons and teachings that they're promoting, that their judgment is actually more harsh, more severe.
Right.
I believe that this should be the same standard for people who are exercising and practicing our laws through our justice system. And I don't see that happening with him at all. I see a lot of soft language, a lot of informalities even between the prosecution and the defense. They seem to be friendly, and they're co-workers at the end of the day. They all got into the same creed and the same pact. And I don't know, man, I have a pit of my stomach feeling this man is going to walk. And he's going to walk because they have held Blake Sharp in jail for a long time. Now, should he be in jail because he violated probation? That's a different case. That's fine. I understand this, but I really do believe they are leveraging that to get this man off.
Yeah, they are, because that is basically basically a non-cooperative or a missing victim. Like, he's not missing, but he's not available exactly. He's not cooperating exactly like another witness would be. And they've got leverage to keep him locked away. And it's hard to prosecute a case without a victim. So they're doing what they can to squeeze him out. So you were there today, and can you give us some background? You said you've been following him to these pretrial conferences, and you're pretty familiar with the case.
I am. Again, I've been accused of being petty. I don't know, divine intervention, call it kinsman, call it what you want, but to have my personal prosecutor, my first one, end up in the situation, I was like, I'm definitely going to show up to every single court proceeding. So I've been there for every hearing, every pretrial. I've read through depositions. I've read through witness testimony lists. I went through all of this because I'm genuinely curious. I don't want to see someone go to prison for something I don't think should go to prison for, but at the same time, I want to make sure the justice system still works for those who are in charge of it. So I am there for every single time that he has a court date. I am there.
And in your experience, is he or has his defense team been trying to explain this away, like as a moment of his lapsed judgment or as a medical condition from him, or in other words, accepting any responsibility for this in order to get out of custody and stuff? Or is he really just pushing it back on the victim, essentially?
They are going very hard towards a self-defense stance. That is what they're going to go with. And again, if you read through all the depositions, all of these statement of facts, it is a self-defense lean they're going towards. And they're promoting him like he is Daniel Penny. There is this menace that exists on the road, and he did what was necessary to make sure that this person wasn't on the road anymore. That's where they're leaning.
Wow.
They have local newspapers putting articles together to make this man almost sound like, what would you have done in that situation? You may have exited your vehicle. You may have been upset. You've been in an accident. People get hot-headed. People have tempers. Sure, you might grab your knife. Sure, you might break open a window. Haven't we all been there at least once?
It is such a joke to hear that as the excuse, but I can understand where they're saying this is going, right? If this guy was driving under the influence, or if he was drunk or something, and they can't test his blood, so you presume that this prosecutor, who's a sworn government official, is just trying out, be out there to just save society and protect the people on the street and all that stuff. This guy is now being essentially taken off the board. They're trying to make it so, it's not going to be available for trial, or if he does go to trial, he'll be not a credible witness. But when this happens, actually, right, people get in road rage incidents and people do crazy things. They're usually not federal prosecutors who are prosecuting other J6ers for violent crimes, but it does happen. And the response is always, what happens a lot too, is people will flee the police. So when cops pull up behind them, they'll see a light. They won't recognize a police car. It'll look like an undercover car. They won't recognize it. They'll flee, right? And then the defense or the excuse from the cops about why they prosecute them and really beat them up over it is because they say you should have just called 911. Just call 911, say, is this a real officer? Come here, defer it all to the cops. And prosecutors say this all the time too, because I've been sitting across from them saying, my client was freaked. She was driving home. It was 2 a.m. Some weird SUV was behind her, and the cops drive like maniac, like at 2 a.m. They come right up to you. They drive like psychopaths. And so people freak out. And then the response from prosecutors is always like, just call the cops. You don't have to get out of your car. Don't flee. Just call us and we'll tell you what to do. So he knows that better than everybody. And as you mentioned before, he should be held to a higher standard, right? He should be able to not do those things while he's got open cases against other people like you for alleged violence, right? And for insurrection and all these things.
I completely agree. I don't think he'll get a favorable jury because there is, higher crime in that county. And maybe he'll get that jury that's biased in the way that DC juries are biased towards conservatives.
And you were there today, and I'm looking at the disposition update. Did he take a plea deal today, or did anything happen like that today?
So what they discussed in court was going to the jail and speaking with Blake Sharp and seeing if they can't come to an agreement. They said this in open court. The state had no problem with it. The judge asked if they wanted to push off the trial date because it seemed like they might need more time, and neither the state nor the defense said it was an issue, that they should be fine by then. I think they're going for a plea deal, and I really truly believe that they are going to persuade him to change his testimony, because his current testimony was he was having a diabetic event on the road. They had low blood sugar. Neither the ambulance, neither the ER physicians could prove that he had any type of low blood sugar. No medicine was given. So with all, again, try to be very honest here, he probably did lie about what happened that day.
Yeah.
He probably was on some type of drug or alcohol. These things probably did happen. It still should never result in him being stabbed.
Right.
We have police for this. The car was stuck. The car was stalled. He wasn't trying to flee the scene. There are people who are supposed to handle these things, and being a prosecutor, you should have known that. You should have trusted in the system that you build up.
Probably a pretty obvious question, but you didn't see any evidence of him having a gun in the car, pointing a gun at the prosecutor or anything like that has come out?
No, nothing. So the way the story is written up by the defense is Patrick exited his vehicle with his knife in hand. And this is the defense is saying this, that he did exit his vehicle with a weapon. He went over and demanded that Blake Sharp exit his vehicle. He did not exit his vehicle. And again, this is the defense saying it, so so I'm allowed to repeat it. It's not allegedly, it's what the defense is admitting. He broke the window with the back handle of his knife, tried to open the door from the inside. Blake tried to shove his arms out of his car, out of his vehicle, and then Patrick Scruggs began to stab him. This is such a clear-cut case to me. Even the defense is saying this is the occurrence of events. So regardless whether the man was under the influence or not, he posed no threat being inside of his vehicle whatsoever, away from everyone else.
So he broke the window to stop some sort of a reckless driver type of a situation and had to break the window down to stab him. I got it.
Again, why not call the police? Why not trust the system that you are a part of, that you are building up? Why not call the police?
Exactly right. And that's what a prosecutor would say to anybody else. Okay, so if anybody else gets out of their car and starts breaking windows and stabbing somebody who might be having a medical emergency, right? He's not the person to make that decision. He may have had a medical emergency, and as far as we know, there's no evidence to show the alternative, right? I think he was taken to the hospital and you said they didn't have any blood results.
Nope.
So you don't just get to start stabbing somebody.
It's all speculation. You can speculate the man was high behind the wheel or drunk behind the wheel, but there is no evidence to suggest that he was. All of it is speculation. And if we're now going to court based on, well, if you look at his history, probably was this, and if that's considered evidence, I mean, good Lord.
Right. And I mean, the case is an interesting case because it's a prosecutor who seemingly snapped. When I watched the video, it looked to me like his body language was he was just mad somebody hit his car kind of a situation. Like he was just, irritated. I don't know if you read it that way.
I do. So if you actually look at Patrick Scruggs' history, and I think it's fair to point this out, because in my case, they brought up my driving record. That's the dirt they had on me, that I had a couple of speeding tickets. Patrick Scruggs he was doing over 20, got a ticket for that. He was improper passing on the interstate.
Wow,
so he has history of not driving well and being an aggressive driver. In a defense is, Blake Sharp has a history of drugs and alcohol. Well, this other guy, Patrick Scruggs, has a history of not driving so well and being very aggressive on the road. How long are we allow him to be on the road before he finishes the job the next time? For doing these speculation things, right?
Yes, and when he's prosecuting other people, or when state level prosecutors are prosecuting people, you don't see federal prosecutors prosecuting people for reckless driving or DUIs generally, unless it's on federal lands. But those would be aggravating factors. Okay, so for the state level prosecutor, if you got a bad criminal record or a bad driving history and you're in a road rage incident where you're coming out and stabbing somebody allegedly, that's going to be used against you and not something that a normal prosecution that's not on your team is going to look kindly at.
This is where I'm at. And these articles that are coming out, I think it was the Herald Tribune, Dan something rather wrote it today or yesterday about if you look at it from an angle, he brought up Blake Sharp's drug history, but not Patrick Scruggs' driving history. And these people, they protect their own. They do.
They do. And what's the other sickening part about this is that he was part of a prosecution team that was going after J6ers. They accused many J6ers of violent behavior, even though that was not in evidence at all. And the J6ers, okay, when they're sentenced, they go to prison for decades at a time. And this guy might walk free.
I think he will. And I really hate saying that. And half the reason I'm here tonight, Robin, is because I hope this reaches some people. I hope that these state prosecutors get wind that we are talking about this, that we are watching this, and that we want to see justice unfold in the way that it unfolded for us. And injustice, maybe actual justice unfold in this situation.
Yeah, that would be nice. And I'm really glad that you're paying attention to it. And is anybody else really covering this in the mainstream media or
no.
in any media?
It did some rounds. We had a couple million views when it first came out last year, but it's gone very quiet since. But they shot at presidents, elections, things like this. There's other things that have been going on.
Well, this trial's scheduled on the 10th, and you're going to be there. So we'll see if there's a plea deal. I mean, is this guy talking about a plea deal? Like, would he take, are there conversations about, probation officer? Are you seeing any of that or observing any of that?
Not yet, but the body language and the language in general using the courtroom is that they will reach a plea deal. The state is not fighting this at all. Any requests that his attorneys have made, they've been more than happy to oblige. Continuances, depositions. They actually had 2 depositions. Typically, it's just one. They've had 2 separate ones. So it seems like they're going above and beyond to accommodate Patrick Scruggs in whatever way he needs. So I think they're going to reach a plea deal. I think it's going to be amicable for all parties other than Blake Sharp.
Yeah, and he'll just be the useful scapegoat, right, who is just going to be this bad apple that they can do whatever they want to because who cares, which is a sick thing.
Yes, but again, I'm calling it now. I really do believe they are going to leverage his violation of probation, his current sentence, whatever fines he has. Like, listen, maybe these things go away. Maybe you're released from jail, but maybe your testimony should change. Maybe you were drunk that day. Maybe you were a threat on the road. Maybe you were trying to run over Patrick Scruggs and he acted in self-defense. I think we're heading that direction.
And so today in court, they just were basically resetting the trial date.
They didn't reset the trial date at all. This was a second pretrial hearing because they were coming under new evidence, new facts. So they continued. The trial date, they didn't even argue to move or push whatsoever. Neither the state nor the defense. And the judge even asked them, he's like, well, it seems like there's a lot of things going on right now. Do we need to push the trial date? Neither one of them attested to what the trial date currently was, which is indicative to me either the state is confident they're going to trial or they're taking a plea deal and they're trying to reach resolution before this happens.
Interesting. A lot of stuff happening happening behind the scenes that you're not privy to in the plea negotiations and the emails in the back rooms. They come out in court, kind of enter a bunch of stuff on the record, and they'll still work it out.
Yep, I think we'll see a plea deal reached within the next 2 weeks. I do. I think the story will get buried, and there will be a prosecutor who was on video stabbing someone walking away.
With a probation deal, maybe unsupervised, or
maybe some anger management classes.
Anger management.
I believe it's going to be that.
Different standards.
Yes.
Well, I'm really glad that you're keeping your eye on it, because I do recall talking about it and we hadn't followed back up on it. So it's nice that you're on it. It's about what we expected. And this is a pattern that comes up, time and time again. Prosecutors protect themselves. People in power protect themselves. And unfortunately, it's happening right now.
So I love Free State Will. He's one of my favorite people. He's in the top 5 of my favorite J6ers. That guy's a gem. I land at a different place on pardons than a lot of J6ers do and a lot of influencers do that are in the MAGA mainstream influence world. I believe there should be pardons for non-violent offenders. Day one, just we're done with this. Let's move forward. The ones that were charged with violence, I think we do need to do a case-by-case view of this. And I think that if you hit a cop, it's always bad. Don't hit cops. It's a bad look. Please don't. But you've already served enough time. Most of these people have served 3 or 4 years. Their sentences should be commuted. Done. We're done with this. My biggest concern with blanket pardons is that we sweep things under the rug and we don't have meaningful investigations. We don't actually look into how January 6th occurred, how it was allowed to occur. We don't look into why Capitol Police were firing munitions that they were not authorized to fire into a crowd that was standing around singing the national anthem. My concern with the blanket pardon is we don't get any of that done, that we move past it. And you can't just move past these things because people have lost their marriages, their homes, their children, their livelihoods, their licenses. You can't just move past it. A pardon it's great on paper. It's an opportunity to shake the president's hand and say, thank you, I appreciate it 4 years later. But how are these people being restored? How do they get back to their lives? We don't answer that question with blanket pardons. We answer it with investigations. We answer it with committees. We answer it with exposing. Some people simply put their hand on the back of an officer's back and pat it and say, thank you for your service. And they got an assault charge that is a felony and they serve time. They've lost everything because of it.
Yeah, I think everything you just laid out there was very reasonable and logical, and it makes a lot of sense to me. I agree that the punishment has been massive over the last 4 years. And so I think that in addition to that, plus the due process problems of, about prosecuting and trying people in one of the bluest places in the whole country is very concerning. And so I think that there were violations that need to be remedied, but I'm with you. I don't want Ray Epps necessarily to get a pardon and to just be forgotten about, right? So anything that's blanket that doesn't allow us to investigate, even at the Proud Boys trial, those projectiles that were being shot into people's faces, right? That came up there and that was discussed, but what they didn't allow was evidence of 8 FBI agents. That was evidence that came into trial, but there were dozens of other HSI agents that never made it into testimony because the judges precluded them. So all of that needs to be exposed. And I think to your point about how do you put some of this back together, it's not about just forgetting it and moving on. It's about showing what actually happened. Like, what is the truth, so that the wives who left their husbands and vice versa can look at it and say, oh yeah, right, I was sold a lie by a propaganda government.
I'm concerned. It's history, right? Canon is written by the victors and we won something here. But until we recanonize the historical event that is January 6th correctly and accurately, we don't really win anything. We don't get to explain the narrative in such a way that history will remember me for being a guy who just showed up to protest, who exercised his First Amendment rights to protest, to peacefully assemble. I need that. That is my win. I think a lot of January 6ers they're tired. I've been done a lot longer than a lot of people. So maybe the reason that I seem to have this reasoning is because I have had time to process and move on. But it's a short-sighted win to just get a pardon and move on. You need your long-term win. And that is, how are my great-grandkids going to view me? How is the next 100 years of American history going to look at this event and say, this is what happened?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm very hopeful that we get people like Pam Bondi, who, right, maybe despite some of her faults on some of the gun stuff, we get Kash Patel, right? If they do declassify some of these things and open up investigations, I think we'll be shocked and disgusted to see actually what went down there. I mean, we've got a pretty good idea of what went down because we covered the trial and all the videos, but I think the public, it's hard for them to wrap their heads around the idea that there were 5 Proud Boys on trial, but they admitted that there were 8 FBI CHS informants. So there's more federal agents than there were defendants that they admitted. And then the defense had 50 plus others that they identified from other entities. So we need to know that. The public needs to know that. And I'm glad we have a shot at it.
I think so. Again, I think the only people who really understand what happened that day are the ones that's affected directly. And everyone else gets the Cliff Notes, gets, the MSNBC edited version that was produced for the J6 committee and blasted everywhere. That's what they get. And I keep telling people, look, you can be vindicated, you can be pardoned, you can be justified, but until history speaks well of you, we're not winning yet. So don't be so short-sighted. You've been here long enough. You've been here too long, in my opinion. But if you waited this long, you've been through this much, don't quit at the end. You need to keep pushing.
Do you have any take or position on potential prosecutions for any of these people? Liz Cheney Cheney. I mean, I've been ranting that she's violating 1512B, obstructing, suborning, perjury, all sorts of stuff.
Yep. Didn't they destroy evidence and documents relating to the J6 committee investigation?
Totally.
Isn't that the exact 1512C that they prosecuted a couple hundred January 6ers for?
Yeah, but because the House of the Administration Committee or whatever, because he did it, they're allowed to do it.
That makes sense.
Yeah, very
that makes sense. If we're going to prosecute anyone, I think Matt Graves is definitely on the list. I think
U.S. attorney from D.C., right?
Yeah, I would love to see Adam Kinzinger brought back. I would love to see Mark Milley brought back and have to discuss his communications with Nancy Pelosi and why the National Guard wasn't deployed. There were phone calls that came through, and the National Guard was there the day before. They were posted everywhere. And I remember walking towards the Capitol, and I was talking to my jiu-jitsu coach, and I was like, man, I wonder if they have live ammunition rounds or they're using rubber bullets today. But I knew that walking up that this might be a dangerous event because I saw the National Guard the day before. They weren't there, and it was the most confusing thing to me. Where is all the security? We're talking about a couple dozen cops that have formed a semicircle towards the western face of the building. Where is everyone? How did this even happen? So I would like to have some actual answers.
Me too. And I think we're getting more and more info very slowly dripping out. We've got new reports on the pipe bomber and how that was a giant distraction and how they moved the bike racks around. And
yeah, the pipe bomber to me is one of the most interesting things about all of this. I honestly believe they thought it was going to be worse than it was. I think they believed that people were going to bring firearms. I think they believed that people were going to actually engage in actual, again, we are the most armed nation in the world, and one side has more guns than the other, and none of that happened. There were a bunch of people who were just careening about and walking through velvet ropes. I think they wanted it to be bigger, the pipe bomb, everything else. I think they had plans for multiple attacks throughout the city that night. I do. I think they would have attributed to Proud Boys, the MAGA movement. I think the Patriot Act 2.0 they passed through. I think they wanted something much worse than what they passed. And because January 6th didn't occur the way that they had planned it to occur, we didn't get the full scale of that.
That's interesting.